Welcome back to Real Talk with Susan Stone and Kristina Supler. We are full-time moms and attorneys bringing our student defense legal practice to life with real, candid conversations.
So here at Real Talk, we're committed to educating our listeners about substance abuse and safety measures that parents and students should know about. On a past episode of Real Talk, we were pleased to have on as a guest Dr. Beth Weinstock of the Birdie Light organization, whose mission is really to spread information about test strips. And we're so pleased to have our guest today.
We are going to talk to Philip Van Gilder. Do you pronounce it Gilder, Philip?
I do, yes.
I have my tongue twisted today, Kristina. And he is a self-described mental health evangelist at the Greenhouse Treatment Center. And I want to add a father of 5. Philip, without speaking out of turn, you indicated in our pre-chat that you had some addiction issues, and so did your children. And for our listeners out there who are mainly parents of high school and college age students, I think your insight is going to be invaluable, and just add on our last podcast with Dr. Weinstock. So before we begin, can you tell us, what is a mental health evangelist? I saw that and I'm like, are you religious? Where are you coming from?
No, it has nothing to do with spirituality. Actually, the evangelist it pulls me away from the marketing aspects. What I'm trying to do, and what I do for the greenhouse, is make us as transparent to the outside community as possible, and make the outside community as transparent to the personnel here as possible, so we can maximize all the resources available, and we can normalize the stigma of mental health issues and addiction, so that it encourages people to just to normalize it, so that people can get help and not feel any sort of a stigma. So I kind of wear my recovery on my sleeve. I mean, if you were to meet me on the street, we were having coffee, bumped into each other, within about 2 or 3 minutes, somehow or another, I would word it that you would know I was a person in long-term recovery.
Philip, you are at Greenhouse Treatment Center, which is a part of the American Addiction Center. Tell us give us some insight into the population that you work with on a daily basis.
And what do you do? Tell us I want to learn about you.
Okay, thank you. So our population is 18 and above. And there are people whose primary diagnosis is substance use. What I do is, as I said, I reach out to the community. We want to know what resources are out there. When you come to treatment, whether you're going to treatment as a young adult or when you're going to treatment as a child, whatever age you're going to treatment, the 28 days today, which is about what most people can expect to get from their insurance, that's the first step. We're a hospital. Most hospitals you go to, when you go to the hospital, you get medicine, you get a cast, your injuries are stitched up. And when you leave, you're virtually on your way to recovery. This hospital is different. What we do here is we give you information. And when you leave, what you do with that information determines whether or not you're going to get well. We don't. And so this is just the first step of your recovery process. So for us, it's important for us to connect with the community, because we expect to take the patient, the client, from the 28 days and send them to someone else for the next level of care, which is a perhaps partial hospitalization, which is the same as all-day programming, but not in a hospital setting, or intensive outpatient, IOP, which is a number of hours each day, allowing them to work but continuing their recovery journey. Or even perhaps a complete step down to continuing care, where they show up for a group once a week or once a month for continuing care.
It's such a long process to recovery. I admire anybody who has the courage to go through it. You talked about working with students 18 and above. Tell us, what insights do you have today on young adults battling with addiction? Anything different, new?
Or what's the most prevalent form of addiction you're seeing?
Oh, great question, Kristina.
Yeah, that is a good question. Yeah, what we're seeing today is it starts much younger. So by the time we see an 18-year-old, they've been involved in some of the statistics I can show, go back to the 7th and 8th grade.
Mm.
And it was, and
With alcohol or drugs, 7th or 8th grade?
both, and
That's
with
shocking.
non-prescribed medications. And I some statistics as recently as that 2020, just from this area, or we're just would be the same as any area. 30% of 10th graders, 30% of 10th graders either found it not dangerous to use marijuana. And yet we know the THC content of marijuana today is so high that it can be very destructive in young developing minds at 30%. So fully a third of 10th graders believe it's safe to use marijuana.
Well, if it's legal in some states, how would parents dispel that belief?
Well,
I will say in a past episode, we had on Dr. Jill Grimes, and who's written a book for college audiences. And she is a big believer that it is essential that parents educate their children that marijuana is harmful, no matter what anyone thinks, if it's legalized or not. It does things to developing brains, and students need to be aware of the negative impact on brain development.
yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that. So let's go back 30, 40 years ago when the THC was 3 to 4%, and people, perhaps college age, experimented with it. Maybe they even used it frequently, but it's still 3 to 4%. Today, we see pure marijuana at 18 to 20%. And in a developing brain, we're seeing cases of psychosis in 16-year-olds first-time use. We're talking some serious damage. And we know that, well, first of all, and it's not to beat up on young people, but if a little is good, a lot is better. So there is no moderation. When we're looking, see another thing I've got here. 1 in 5 8th graders believe that it's 20%, almost 21% of 8th graders believe it's okay to use non-prescribed medications because of the way it makes you feel. Not just marijuana, but we're talking about people that walk up to the medicine cabinet, grab some mood-altering medication and think it's safe to use a non-prescribed medication.
Because it's right in the home.
That they get out of the medicine cabinet because their parents have taken it on a prescribed basis for the right reasons. And they believe it's okay and it's safe. They believe it's safe, not just okay, but safe to use it because it's, after all, it's a prescribed medication prescribed for someone else.
Sure. Well, and also I think we'd be remiss not to mention that with marijuana in this day and age, there's also all the risks in that we don't know what marijuana or other street drugs could be laced with.
Right. And I was thinking one of the questions I wanted you to opine about is how, if you're in college and you're drinking or occasionally using recreational drugs, how would a student know if what they're doing is within that normal college range versus heading to addiction? What is the line between, okay, you're just having fun in college,
A recreational user.
between, or you need to get help? Is it grade slipping, loss of friendships? What are your thoughts?
So I don't want to be vague about this, but let's go back to what we mean by addictive behavior. When it's compulsive, when I have no choice but to use, when it's no longer a matter of it was socially fun, but when I have to use in order to feel normal. So what is it like for everybody? It's that day when you wake up and you say, I can't face the day without a drink, or I can't face the day without first lighting up a blunt, or I can't face the day without getting a rig and loading it. That's the day when it's gone too far. In fact, one of the newest organizations that we've seen start off in the last, I would say, and I'm guessing at this, maybe the last 4 or 5 years, is young people in recovery on college campuses. We're starting to see a real big push for that because they're not learning how to use in college. They're bringing the addiction to college with them. And so a number of places, and there's a number of campuses around the country. Arizona was one of the first universities in Tempe was one of the first universities to have young people on campus. I'm not trying to promote them, but I just remember meeting some folks that had come out to bring that template to other campuses around the DFW area. And it seemed like people were gravitating towards it because they realized they had a problem. Now I don't know that it's just taken off, but I know that today when I'm talking to a young person that's worried about going to school, like I'm about a young 18-year-old yesterday last night in a meeting, and he said he's studying on campus this fall, and I was able to direct him to a young people's group on the local university campus. So it was kind of nice to see him know that there's a safe place for him to go. He's been struggling since January of this year. It was kind of nice.
Do you think it's got to be very lonely to be a college student today in a fraternity or on a sports team and have to say, I don't drink,
I'm
don't.
an addict.
Yeah, I can't imagine the shame. But, Kristina, we've had a lot of friends tell us they're now sober curious,
The question I had for you, Philip, Susan and I, working with students across the country day in and day out, every day we're hearing terms like blackout, brownout, grayout, and binge drinking has really, it seems, been normalized.
We've seen deaths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a couple of different cases with a death component, and it's an absolute tragedy. What are your thoughts on why students are indulging, whether it's alcohol or drugs, to such extremes now? Do you think it's the influence of social media? Is it the pandemic and mental health? Or, working with populations at Greenhouse, do you have any insight?
Yeah, I was going to say, Kristina, we dealt with that one case where students drink whole bottles of alcohol. And I have to tell you, I don't remember that. Did you have that at college?
It certainly seems that in the news, there's more reports about fraternity hazing and student, let's just say, excess. And I don't know if it's because it's going on with greater frequency or just the media and other professionals are trying to bring more awareness so that students can be safe. But Philip, what are your thoughts?
I don't think someone says, this is the weekend I want to binge. You get there with that compulsive addictive behavior. If you're truly, and let's use alcohol, let me separate that from other drugs. Let's use alcohol. We know that medically there's a craving component that comes. People that are alcoholics, typically, if we look at the medical component, it says that we're not able to process or metabolize alcohol at the same rate a non-alcoholic is. Whereas a non-alcoholic can process about 1 ounce per hour, we can't. We're missing certain components genetically that keep us or prevent us from being able to do that. So if we drink more than 1 ounce per hour, and what happens because we retain the alcohol in our system longer because we can't metabolize it, we can't discharge it, it kicks off the craving. So the more we drink, the more we crave. And that's
interesting.
A medical thing. Whereas you might drink 1 ounce per hour, by the time you get to the second or third one, you're going, I got a buzz. I'm sitting here thinking, man, I need to have some more. I don't have a buzz. Like, I want the buzz. You consider something that makes you uncomfortable, and I consider it something that's necessary.
So that's why all of a sudden they're craving these students, and then all of a sudden blackout.
Yeah, because the more they drink, the more they crave. At midnight, Joe and Charlie talk about this, two wonderful people that are in recovery that are both passed now, but that have the same they talk about. At midnight, after I've been drinking all night long, and I pass out in the parking lot of the bar, and I get run over by a car, and you come over to help me, and the first thing I say is, when you say, what can I do to help you? And I say, oh my God, get me a drink. Like, I still haven't had enough. That, for me, the cravings kicked off at 2:00 in the morning. My craving, my desire for alcohol is so much greater than it was when I started because I didn't have a craving until I put alcohol in my body. That initiated the craving.
Philip,
the more I drink, the more I crave. I'm sorry?
I've got to ask. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. But does the craving ever go away, or do you just learn to live with
Learn to manage it?
Yeah, so that goes to the second component. It's the obsession of the mind coupled with the allergy of the body. If I don't put the alcohol in my body, I cannot kick off the craving. And what happens is after some period of time, I go, well, I haven't had a drink in 3 weeks. I'm probably not that bad. It, I'm just going to have one. And so I played this game that says I'm just going to have one because it's been a while since I've kicked off the craving. The moment I put the alcohol in my body, I kick off the craving. I'm back in this cycle again, and I wake up once again in the next day. I can't tell you what happened the night before, and once again, I'm going to swear off alcohol forever.
So with a long, let's just say, for example, a long stint of sobriety from any substance, alcohol or drugs, if an individual has been sober for, let's just say, 5 years, does it get easier as time passes, or do you still really have to be focused and dedicated to sobriety?
All right. So I wouldn't speak for others. Each journey's individual, but for the people that I've been around, the people that I hang out with, I'm sober coming up on just about 19 years. As I said to you earlier, I met a young man at a meeting last night. I go to meetings frequently, 2 or 3 times a week, because I have a disease that tells me I don't have a disease. So for me, the easiest thing for me to do, because I used to spend all my time thinking about drinking. If I wasn't thinking about it, I was drinking. Today, it's a few hours. I spend a few moments each morning starting my day with a little prayer meditation, trying to connect with the power greater than myself, and do meetings and do service work, carry the message to others. But the only time I think about drinking is when I go to a meeting that I'm meeting a newcomer that's talking about drinking. I don't think about it, but that's my disease. So my disease is sitting there on my shoulder.
Disease telling you don't have a disease. I've
I
never
don't
heard
have
it
a
that way, but
disease.
that's interesting.
That's an
Yeah.
incredible thought, that the difference between your disease and, let's say, God forbid, someone with cancer is someone
Yeah.
with cancer doesn't say, I don't have cancer. But someone with alcoholism says, I don't have it. That's incredible. I want to shift gears a little bit because Kristina and I work with students with mental health challenges, other mental health challenges, and we know you do too, as you call yourself a mental health evangelist. And we see you've done a lot of work with the stigma associated with mental health issues. We've come a long way, our society as a whole, destigmatizing mental health issues. But I'd like to know from your perspective, what do you think today remains as a stigma, if anything, or do you think the stigma's gone?
Oh, no, the stigma's there. Until you have a loved one that's struggling, you said it. Let's talk about substance use, or we'll talk about mental health, even mental health issues. We're still the bottom feeders of diseases. I mean, if you tell somebody you got cancer, they're out there having a parade to raise money to help you with your treatment. You tell somebody that you've got a mental health issue or you're an alcoholic, and they're going to change seats so that they don't catch it. We're talking about it openly now, but that doesn't take it away, because until it's actually a part of your family, or until you have a neighbor, or until you have a loved one, or until you know someone on a personal level, until that happens, it's just a terrible thing that happens to other people. And I don't want to be around them because they're mentally not right.
Sure. Or it's a theoretical issue that's, a lack of discipline that wouldn't
Right.
happen in my family. My kids wouldn't succumb to that. So let me ask you, on this topic of mental health and substance abuse, how much more difficult, if at all, is it to treat substance abuse when there's other mental health issues present? Or is it sort of the same approach to treatment regardless of anxiety, depression, and other comorbidities?
That's a good question. And also, we know a lot of students with mental health issues have to take medications like Ritalin or Adderall, or they can't function and learn. But if there's also an addiction issue, I also always wondered, oh my gosh,
complicated.
that's really complicated.
This is a tough one, because we have to stabilize the mental health component before you can treat the addiction. What comes first? I mean, oftentimes the addiction was their solution for their perceived problem. it's really tough, but you got to do them. They both have to be done together, but you can't treat the addiction if you're not treating the mental health component, and you can't, it's got to be done in conjunction with one another. If they're acute, before you can treat the addiction, you have to help them get stabilized, because you can't begin to pay attention. Remember, I told you, we're transferring knowledge to an individual. If the individual can't sit still and can't regulate, we can't transfer that knowledge. So now we've got to find a place for them to go where they can be stabilized, so that they can be okay in their own skin. I mean, when you see certain people with certain mental health issues, they're climbing out of their skin. The last thing you do is say, hey,
Literally, and
let's take away
seen
your
it.
solution. Right. We can't take away your solution because you're already climbing out of your own skin.
Yeah, it's so interesting because Kristina and I will often have to have students get ready for their interview or for a hearing, and we will notice that if there's a student and they have not taken their, let's say, medication for whatever issue that's going on, it is very hard for us to work with those students because they can't focus and they're fidgeting.
Yeah. I mean, what a dilemma. And then if it's addictive behavior, let's say that they're normal, they're regulated. And then let's say we've got them to where they're not, the alcohol or the drug component is manageable. Suddenly their sex addiction takes off.
Mm.
Yes.
So interesting that you bring that up, because we see that in so many of our cases where the addiction is perhaps a coping mechanism for other underlying mental health issues. And sometimes one addiction just sort of trades out for another. And so let me ask you, is it true that there is such thing as an addictive personality? Someone who's just naturally, whether it's baseball cards, coffee, substances, if they do something once, they just really like it and they're all in and everything is to excess.
Well, I don't think I think I'd leave that to the medical community, but I would say this. I think it's possible to have addictive behavior as opposed to addictive personality. Going to what you were saying, I mean, now we get the sex addiction under control, we get the alcohol addiction under control, that we're regulated, and suddenly we're sitting at the casino gambling, or we're online shopping with Amazon, or whatever it is.
Or overeating.
Or food, or over exercising, or over. But
yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's actually an addictive personality, or is it a sign of just some other emotional need to fill a space or a void?
Once again, I think I have to defer to the medical community as the causation.
We're going to have to explore this more in our podcast, Kristina. And I want to switch gears because I was reading a little bit about you to get ready, and I noticed that you also talk about eating disorders. And I'm 56, and when I went to college, I knew many, many, many students who suffered from bulimia or anorexia. And as also a mother who has raised and is raising daughters, I don't see the eating disorders as being as prevalent. And in fact, I see a lot more body positivity, but I see more cutting, a different type of form of control or relieving of mental health issues. And I just want to know what your thoughts are on the topic of eating disorders versus cutting versus trichotillomania, which is the hair pulling, hair.
They're all symptomatic and indicative of someone that's ill. And the eating disorders probably, and I've got to be careful for all my friends in the eating disorder community that I love, all the professionals, because I'm around so many experts, and I don't perceive myself to be an expert, but I'm someone that's passionate about it because I see it as a very common trait. I remember at one point about 10 years ago, one of the big things going on, you were talking about college, and it was mostly college. It was sorority. So it was mostly the female side, but there was this ability to inhale alcohol, and women were using these, and there was using like humidifiers, and they would ingest alcohol that way to minimize the amount of weight they put on by consuming alcohol, so they could get the effect of being
That's
drunk.
crazy.
They could get the effect of being drunk, but they
Wow.
wouldn't add weight. Yeah, and so and there's a name for it, and I can't remember now. But we had a real rash of that. I'm going to say it's about 10 years ago, where that was the big thing on college campuses, especially for sororities. They would have these parties where they would inhale through these misters alcohol, so they wouldn't gain weight. Very prevalent.
So what are you seeing now that's coming in terms of eating disorders in your centers?
Especially here at the greenhouse, we're screening for it, because it's if you've got an alcohol or a drug disorder, you're very high on the spectrum of possibilities of an eating disorder, and in fact, we see quite a bit of that. I'm getting the problem here. It says I should dial in. I'm not sure if that's correct.
No, you're okay.
Okay.
So
All right.
Last-
I'm sorry. I just got a warning, and I
No,
wasn't
that's
sure if
okay.
it's like NASA. We're like about to do a launch.
That's what makes this a real podcast, Philip, is that I start with a tongue twister, you get a tech warning, and that's what makes our listeners know that it's not scripted or canned and that we're being authentic here.
Oh, I love it. That's great.
Last question, Philip. What's the best piece of advice that you can offer for our parent listeners out there in terms of what they should talk to their students about before heading off to college in the fall?
Or even on summer break right now.
Actually,
Yeah.
you're so right, Susan.
Every parent, whether you see any sort of behavior or not, statistically, your child is either connected with addictive behavior, doing it themselves, or they know someone that is, but you've got to start talking to them about resources, about no shame, and just talking about it, just being open about it. We never talked about it. And I remember, this is part of my background many years ago, the way I got involved with eating disorders is I was on the board of directors of a ballet company in California. And I would listen to the artistic director line the young people up, and we're talking young, 12, 13, 14-year-old students. And she would call them, she'd say, "You're all fat." And I would ask friends of mine, it didn't seem to me that was appropriate. And I would say to people, that doesn't seem like a very nice way to treat young people. That's what I thought. That's not a nice thing to say. And they would say, "Yes, but you understand, she's a Balanchine. She loves slender dancers." And I would go, "Oh, okay." Not realizing how much damage was being done by these statements by this adult to these 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds. That goes on today. We allow kids to make fun of other kids based on the body, the visibility. And instead of being body beautiful, it's like every advertisement today is still around slender body types. It's rare that we see a commercial with real people. And so I guess going back to your question, what for adults, let's just talk about it. Let's just have a discussion about it. Let's just make it safe for people to come to us and chat with us about things they don't understand.
Well, and we're so lucky that you came here to chat with us on Real Talk with Susan and Kristina, because that's what the goal of our podcast is.
We always want to encourage parents to have open dialogue with their students about any topic: drugs, sex, alcohol, disabilities, stress management. Our goal is just to promote wellness for the student population. So we're so pleased that you were able to join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. It was a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to be with you guys and excited for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Susan and Kristina. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And leave us a review so other people can find the content we share here. You can follow us on Instagram. Just search our handle @StoneSupler. And for more resources, visit us online at studentdefense.kjk.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Real Talk community. We'll see you next time.